All right, we started with our CSS class last week, and today we are going to continue from there. Last week we talked about what is CSS, how we can include CSS on a page. We talked about rule sets. When you are dealing with embedded or external CSS, you need to know about rule sets, and we talked about them at our last class. So today we're going to be starting with this grouping in HTML. Then after that, we'll move into this basic selector in CSS. And if we are able to finish this thing on time, we might get into units in CSS. But for today, and majorly, these selectors are very important when you are dealing with external or embedded selector. And in HTML, we have grouping, which is these are elements or tags that you are going to be using later on to group different elements that you have on the page together. So here, look at, let me go to this site. As you can see, this is a site here. And on this side, they have this contact us page where you can contact the people that owns the site. But if you look at this page, it have different section or different area that have different styling for them. So if you look at it here now on this site, you see that all the styling that you have here is quite different from what is down here. And whatever that is going on with the top section here is not affecting the one that is at this bottom section. Again too, there is a group here, which is where we have this box that wraps everything. So how do you group different elements on the page together, or how do you do something like this? You need to know about grouping in HTML. So these tags, they don't really give you any visual representation. They don't really give you any formatting on the screen. They are there just to group different elements together. Which means when you use them, you're not going to see any changes until you start applying your styling to that particular group. So we normally use them to group different sections together. The same thing too, as you can see here, this one is having this background, and that the older section here is the one that have this image. Once you scroll down, you see that we have another section again. So how do you create all this section? You can use grouping in HTML to group things together based on what you want to showcase on the page. Again, here too, the site that I showed last time, here we have different sections or we have different groups. So here we have this group for the header, which is the one that groups everything together here. Again, there is another group here, which is the one that holds all this content. And inside this place too, you have the group for the left side and you have the group for the right side where the image is being placed. So how do you do all this grouping, or how do you make sure your element goes together there as a group? You can use the grouping element. And in HTML, we have different elements that you can use to achieve this. So we have the div element, we have the section element. These are new tags that are introduced in the HTML5 that we have there. But you can use any one of them. Majorly on a site, you always see this div being used, which is just for division. You use it to create a division on your page, just like the way you have this division or this section here that is talking about what their product is all about or what they are doing there. So they deal with gift card, they deal with this, they trade in cryptocurrency and so forth like that. But if you look at each one of them, they are like a group or division. So how do you create this division? You can use all these elements that we have here, like this div, the section, the header, the nav, and the footer here. So you always use them later on to group different sections of your page together. So we normally use this header to group the header part of the site. Can you see the color there? You see that everything here is having this white background and they are together like a group. So we normally use header to group what is at the top of the site together like this. And for the footer, we use it for the bottom part of the site, which kind of hold all the information that you normally see at the bottom side of any site. So we use this footer. So for the nav, we normally use that one to group all the navigation on the site together. For example, this one can be a nav. That's the full meaning of the nav is just navigation, which is like a group that groups all your navigation link, or that group all the link that you can use to move from one place to another on your site there. But I won't be using some of them right now until we need them later on. The one I will be using from this moment on is this div here, because I will be using it a lot there, because I want to group different sections, and whatever I'm doing, I only want it to be on that particular section, not everything that we have inside this HTML file. And how do you do it? It's just as if you are creating your normal HTML out there. So for example here, I want to have a division. So I'm going to create a div element here, and inside this div, I can put whatever I want. And later on, I can style this H1 that is inside this particular division alone without touching any other H1 on the page. Or whatever I'm doing with this group, it will not affect any other element or group outside of this particular division that we have here. So this div or this grouping element are really useful when you need to isolate some of your design on the page. So this is one div. So the div that we have here, whatever I want to do with it, it will not affect the div that I have down here. And I can show it to you right now by applying my inline style on them. For example here, let me go back to the page. The styling that I'm applying on everything, I'm going to comment them out, which is something I've explained last time. What is comments? So let me remove the comments. Let me add the comment there. Again, do I have any other thing? Let me reload. Yeah, so there is no more style on any of these elements. And again, let me save the code so that we can have this thing on the page. So on the page, as you can see, it looks like we only have normal H1 there. But from the code, you know that this thing is inside a group. So let me add a p tag here, which is going to be group 1. So lorem like this to just generate some dummy text for us at that place. Again, I'm going to have another p here, and I'm going to write group 2. Then this 2 is going to be lorem and save. So getting to the page, it looks as if we just type our normal H1 and the paragraph. But in a real sense, they are actually in a group. And that's what I mentioned, that this grouping stuff or this grouping tag, they don't really give you any visual representation on the screen. So which means it's not like the H1 that when you use it, your text will be bold and it's going to be big. When you're dealing with paragraph, it's going to give you some spacing and so forth like that. With this grouping element, they don't give you any visual on the screen until you start applying style on them to make them different from the other elements that you have on the screen. And here now, I can enter this div and give you this inline CSS and just change the background to red. You see that with this now, it will only affect whatever you have inside that group. Any other thing outside of that group are not going to be partake in the styling, as you can see here. So this is where the power comes in. So you use them to group other elements, and you can style that group, and whatever you are doing with that group or whatever styling you are using on that group, it will only affect the content that is inside that particular group, not that it will be touching any other element on the page. And as you can see here, I have another div down here, but nothing is happening to that one. Why? Because this is a separate group on its own. And if I want to do something different with this one too, I just need to go there, give it its own styling that I want there. And here you have a group of elements that is having the same, or that is having a style different from other groups that you have on the page, which is the same thing that is going on here. You see that this one is having this particular light blue background, while this one is having this like a orange, the light orange or the light red color as the background there, like that. The same thing here too, as you can see, even though they look alike, but each group have their own this kind of a specific styling that is going with them, and it's not affecting any other element on the page. So in order for you to do that, whatever element that you want them to have the same style and they needs to be like a group, then you need to use any of these grouping elements that I have up here, like div, section, header, nav, and so forth like that. I'm going to bring out the other one too, but for now, I will always be using the div tag because it's kind of the most used element for grouping on the page. So if you go to any site and you check their code, you always see div being used because when you have some element, you need to let them be as a group. And when you want to group them, what do you use? You are going to use the div. And as you can see from here, what Facebook is using is just that div. And that's what they are using to group everything that is inside this white box together. But apart from that, on this page, we still have some other group. Like this section, as you can see, all of them, they are in a group. This is another group on its own, and so forth like that. So when you want to group different elements together, what do you use? You can use the div element, and it's the most used one that we have there. But we have other one that you can use, like the header and a lot of them. But the most used one is this div element. As you can see here on Facebook, they are using it a lot. So it is a major grouping element that we have because right from day one of HTML, the div has always been there. But all these other ones that I mentioned, like nav and so forth like that, they are just being introduced in HTML5 are there. But right from HTML1, the div has been there. That's the reason why I'll be using it for now, like that. But later on, we have some other grouping elements that you can use. So group is really important because not every element, even though they are the same thing, even though you have like 10 H2 on the page, that doesn't mean they will have the same styling. Or the styling you are using from one group will be from another group. No, it's going to be different one based on your design there. And how do you apply a style based on a group? What you do is to group all your elements that you want them to have the same styling or you want them to act as a group. Then you use this div, then you can start applying your style on them. But I won't be using this method because I told you that inline CSS is not that useful because when you want to apply the same styling now to different groups at the same time, you have to be doing copy and paste. But instead of you doing copy and paste, last time I talked about class and at the same time I talked about ID. So I said that ID is what you can use to uniquely identify a particular element. So you can use ID now as kind of like a unique tag to a particular element. So when you need to reference it later on, you can reference it through the ID that you attach to that element. An ID is just an attribute on any element that you want to give ID. But I told you that ID is always unique. So which means whatever ID you give to one element should not be the same ID for another element, which is what we have here on line 39 and line 45 here. So this OL is having ID with list, while this H1 is having ID with list 1. So they are not the same. But you can't have something like this. This is wrong. You shouldn't be doing something like this. So the name should be different. You can give any element ID, but the name you are giving to that element should be different from other elements you are used on the they're using on the page. But contrary to this one is the class. Just like the normal class in school, multiple people can be inside a single class. So you have the CSS class, and all of you or your classmates can be offering that same class. The same here too, one element can belong to one class or multiple classes. So class are useful to style different elements with the same styling. So when you have different elements and you want them to have the same styling, you can give all of them the same class. So here now I have this H1 which is having class heading, and at the same time anywhere on this page I can use it again. So whatever I do now with this class there from CSS later on, it will affect the H1 that I have on this line 83, and at the same time it's going to affect the one on this line 38. But they don't need to be the same element. Here I can just go to this li2 and just give it that same class. What this means is that whatever I do with this class from the CSS, it will apply it on this H1, it will apply it on this li rather, it will apply it on this H1 and it will still apply it down here on this H1. So with class, you can use it to style multiple elements at the same time, because most of the time all the elements you want to style the same might not be the same tag. So like this one that I have H1 and I have this li at the top, but I want them to have the same styling. Since I want them to have the same styling, you can't just say H1 alone, so you need to mention li too. But instead of me mentioning their name or using their name to style them, I can just use the class that I apply on them to apply the styling. But what am I talking about here? How do I apply the styling based on class? How do I apply the styling based on element name and so forth like that? That's where the selector comes in. Because with selector, you can target different elements based on whatever type of selector we have here. So particular elements that you have on the page, you can target it with different method. And what do I mean by target? You know, when you are dealing with embedded or external CSS, what you'll be doing is rule set. And what is rule set? Rule set is a combination of selector and along with the declaration that you want to apply on the element. So here, which element do you want to style? Or where am I going to get the elements that you want to style? That is the selector. And what are the styling that you want to do there? What are the styles that you want to apply on that element? That's the declaration, just like the way we have it on this line 18 here. But this is not the only way that you can select your element. We have different type of selector that you can use, ranging from this element selector. This one means you are selecting based on the name of the element. And as you can see here, you can select element to based on its class. You can select element based on the ID that you attach to that element or to the element. But you know, if it is ID, it's always going to be 1 because you know that it should always be unique. But if it is class, you know, this one can target multiple elements because multiple elements can have the same class, or one element can have multiple classes, just like the way it is on line 46 here. This single OL, we can style it through the list. At the same time, we can style it through orange and we can style it through this upper because it's having these 3 classes. And how do you know that there are 3 classes? They are being separated by space here. But if you are using iPhone, this is now 2 classes. So this one is not 3 again, it's now 2. So we have list orange as our first class and upper as the second class. So to separate each one of the classes here, you are going to use space. So space is what you'll be using to separate each one of the class. And as you can see on Facebook here too, they are using it. So let me go to any of the elements. As you can see on this page, Facebook is styling or is having some of this stuff that I just talked about now on the page. If you look at this div element that we have here, can you see it have an ID attached to it, which they are calling global container, and at the same time they have a particular class on it. Then based on this class, Facebook can style or apply the CSS on this particular group or the elements that you have on the page. And as you can see too, it's on the body. So it's a more like it's something that you always use a lot. But if you look at it, it's not just one class that is on the body. There is class for registration. There is another class here which is this UI page logout. There is another class with this underscore whatever stuff and so forth like that. There is another class there X1. There is another class there Win, which is for window and so forth like that. There is another one there which is for local ENGB, which is what they are using to style any language for the English or based on whatever country you are coming from and so forth like that. But you're always going to be having classes or like that a lot of your element because some of the styling you want to apply, it's going to be on different elements. It can be the same or it can be a separate element, but most of them want to have the same look. Like this input we have here. If you look at the styling we have on this input, it's the same thing that we have here on this select. But this is input and this is select. But you want them to have the same style. So what you can do here is to give the same class that you have for this input to this select. And you can quickly style them based on that particular class. So class are very useful because most of the elements you have on the page will look alike. And you can just style them once by using a class. And any element that needs to have that particular styling, you just go to that element and you have give it the class, and everything is going to work. So we are going to be starting with this our basic selector that we have here, which is something I've been using already from our CSS here. So when you want to select based on element, what that thing means is that you are selecting based on the name of the tag or the element that you have on the page. For example, here I'm selecting all the H1. That's what this thing means here. I'm selecting all the H1 that I have on the page. So if you go to the page, look for anywhere we have H1 on the page, and it's going to change the color to red. And as you can see here, it will only change only H1, because that's what we said we are looking for. So what this thing is going to select is all the H1 that we have on the page. That's what the selector is talking about. But you need to be able to interpret selectors. So what this thing is saying is that you want to select all the H1 on the page. And when it sees the H1 on the page, then change the color to red. Again too, we can target another element, for example, like this P. So this is another element selector because we are targeting the P element. So when you do it in this way, or when you are doing your selector in this way, they are referred to as element selector. You are selecting your element on the page based on their name. That's what we call element selector. So when you're talking about element selector, you are targeting the content on the page based on the name of the element. And as you can see here now, anywhere we have P is going to change the color to green. And I think that, okay, these are the other P. And as you can see, the colors are green there like that. So we have the green color showing on the page. Why? Because we are targeting the P element. So when you want to start any element on the page using external or embedded CSS selector there, embedded style there, you are going to use rule set. And I told you that rule set is a combination of selector, which is what you are going to use to talk to CSS where to apply your style. But what are the styling do you want to apply? That's where the declaration comes in. And you know, when you're talking about declaration, is the combination of property and the value that you want to change. So this is the property we want to change, and this is what we are changing it to. So whatever that is there before will be replaced with this new value. The same thing for this P. We are looking for all the P on the page, and once we find it, then we change the color to green. But there's a lot of things that you can change about your element later on. And when we get to property, that's where we'll be talking about them. But for now, I will always be using this color background for now. But I will explain about them when we get to the property part. But for now, I will just be using them like this. So let me just save and go back to the page. You see down all our P on the page, they are now of this size. Again, they are having a background of this orange, and the color is now green. So we are declaring to the CSS what we want and where we want it. And where you want it is the selector. What you want is the declarations. So here we have the color declaration, we have the background declaration, and we have the font size declaration. But what is this 2rem? Once we get to the class of this CSS unit, as you can see, I will explain it at that part. But for now, I will be using all this in. I won't be caring about them, but what they mean. When we get to the part you need it, or that I'll be explaining this stuff, you understand them, because it's something you need to know what this 2rem is doing here. But for now, I won't touch that. What we are focusing on is the selector. And the one we are talking about right now is the element, which allows you to target or to style any element on the page based on the name of the tag there. So here we are selecting all the H1 on the page, while this one is selecting all the P. Look at what I meant. Listen to what I'm saying. Oh, I said all the P. When you do it like this, what you are saying is that you want to select all of them. Not that you want to select the first one or the second one or the third one. No, there is a way of doing that later on with some other selector. But for this type of selector here, is looking for all of them. And that's why you see that it's applying it to this P here, and it's still doing it down here to all the P that I have here, because it's looking for all of them, not just the first one or the third one or the last one and so forth like that. But later on too, you can talk to CSS that you don't want all the P, you only need the first one, or you need the last one, or you need the second one, and so forth like that. We are going to get all those selectors later on. But the selector we need for now, in order for us to start working, these are them here. But we have more than this. We have more than this when you are dealing with selector. But these are the one you need before you start doing something meaningful there. We started with this, our basic one here, which is the element selector. But apart from element selector, you can select your elements based on their classes. So based on the classes that you apply on the element, you can style them there like that. So you can target them or you can select them based on the class that you apply on the element. And how do you do it? So to select based on class in your CSS there, so you are going to start with dot. It's very important. That's how this thing is going to know that you are selecting based on class. In order for this thing to know that you are selecting based on class, you start with dot, then followed by the class name. And what did I mean by class name? That's the name that you give to your element. The class, the name that you give to that class, that's what I'm calling class name. So this thing allows you to select your element based on class. So this thing allows us to select our element based on the class that you're applying on that element. But in order for CSS or in order for the engine to know that you want to target based on class, you need to start with dots. That's the only thing that this thing will know that you are talking about class. So in order for it to know that you are talking about class, you are going to start with dots, then followed by whatever name that you give to that your element. So whatever class name that you give to that your element, that will follow it. No space, because each class is just a normal letters there, which can have underscore or hyphen there. But for now, I will just be using a normal word, which are the normal text there like that. So to select a class, so selection based on class. So to select based on class, you are going to start with dot, then followed by the name of the class. So for example here now, I'm selecting any element that have class heading. That's what this thing is saying. So anywhere that is class heading on our page, then it's going to style that element. That's what this one is saying. So look for, as you can see here, it will look for any element that have class heading. So that's the meaning of this thing. So you should be able to interpret CSS. That's the reason why I'm talking about them in normal or in plain English. That's the translation here. This line that you are seeing here, what you are talking to CSS is that look for any element. We don't care about it, whether it is H1 or it is H2 or it is Li or anything. That's why it's not showing any of the name. It just say element. So it can be any one of them. But if it is normal element that you target, you are going to see the element here. But since it's an element, it means it can be any one of them. But that element must have this particular class that we have here. As you can see the sample. So which means it will go to the page, look for any element that have this thing, that have this attribute on it, which is that class with that particular value heading. So which means it's going to pick this H1, it's going to pick this Li, and which other one do we have here? Yeah, it's going to pick this one too. So it's going to style this CSS property, it's going to style this our inline, and at the same time it's going to style this how to include CSS on the page, because we are targeting any element that have this particular class heading. So let me save and go back to the page. Can you see? So it will pick it up. It will pick this one too. Why is it picking it? Because it have that particular class. So any element that have that particular class is going to apply whatever declaration or properties that you want to change on it like that. So to select a class, you start with dot, then followed by the name of the class. Then from there, you just apply whatever property you want to apply like that. So for example here now, anywhere we have class upper, I want their text to be in uppercase. Well, that's what this thing is doing, but I will explain it better when we get to the property. And this text decoration is just talking about underline. You know, if you remember, when we are talking about the formatting of text, we talk about the U tag to add underline to your text. So this is how to do it in CSS without using the U tag. But for now, I don't need to be explaining all this property. Once we get there, I will explain them better. But let me save it, and as you can see what is going on. Anywhere we have that class is going to apply it to all of them. But why is it doing it to all this one? Even though I did not have this in there. So let me go back to the page. Why is it doing it to them like that? So where is it? Where is it? I have grouping in HTML. So where's my grouping? Let me scroll down to that section. So attribute element. Yeah, so as you can see, this is the reason why it's applying it, because all the li, they are inside OL. So whatever you do to the group, it will affect what is inside them. But how do you have your own custom group? That's the one I talked about down here, which is the div element that you can use to group different elements together. But you know that some of these elements already have grouping in them, like this OL, that you can use to group all your list items together. And that's the reason why you see that all the li here, they are having that underline, and they are both because they are part of that group. And which group are they part of? They are part of this group upper here, which is this OL. Because this thing is having class upper, it will pick them up. And again, to look at this H1, there is a class upper there, and that's why that one too is in uppercase, and it is underline there like that. But you might be thinking, what if I don't want to do it for the one that is on OL? I want to do it for the one that is on H1. So any H1 that have upper, that is the one I want to style, not the upper that is on OL. You can do that too in CSS. But for now, we are focusing on the basic one. If I want to select the one for H1 only, I can actually combine them together. And as you can see, it's only working on H1. It's not working on the OL again. Even though OL is having that upper, but it will not work because of the selector that I passed to CSS. But for now, I don't need to do this one because we are only talking about class selector, not combination of element and class together, because you can have combinatory selector later on. But the one we are talking about right now is just the basic one, which allows you to style your element based on all this basic way of targeting the elements on the page. And we started with the element selector, which allows you to just style element based on its name, or you can style element based on the classes that you have on it. So we are targeting any element that have class heading. We change the colors to red. We are targeting any element that have class upper, and we are applying these two properties there like that. So which means anywhere you have that style on the page, it will, or anywhere you have that element with that class on the page, it will style them. It doesn't care about whether it is H1 or it is H2 or it is p tag or it is form. As long that element is having that particular class, it's going to style all of them. But you can actually constrain it later on that this particular element is what you are looking for, not just any element. So this one right now, it will look for any element that have that particular class you are looking for there. So to select element based on class, once again, you have dots, then after the dot, followed by the name, no space. You start with dot, no space, then followed by the name of the class. So here I'm looking for list. Anywhere there is list on the page, I want the color to be green. I want the font size, like mean the size of the text, I want it to be big or bold, or no, not bold. I want the size to be big there. And now going back to the page, you see that the color will be green and the text is going to be big like that. So why is it big? It's because of this property. Why is the color doing this? Is because of the color we have here. But now, why is it having underline? Is because that element is having these two classes. That's why it's applying everything from here, and at the same time, it's applying everything from here. So if you go back to the page, as you can see, that OL, it have list, and at the same time, it have upper, which is something I mentioned before. For this single element, you can style it based on these three classes. So whatever you do from list, it will apply on OL. Whatever you do with this class orange, it will apply on OL. Whatever you do with the class upper, it will apply it on this same OL, because that OL is having these three classes. So since it's having these three classes, whatever you are doing with this class here, it's going to apply it on the element. So for the upper, we make sure that everything is uppercase and it's underlined. It picked that style. Because it's having the class list too, as you can see, it picked the color of orange and it picked the font. But if you look at this H1 here, you see that one is not color green and it's not bold because it only have class upper, it did not have the class list. But if I want the same thing to happen to this H1 too, I just need to add that class to the list to add it. And once it's added, as you can see, it will pick it up. So with CSS, you can style your element based on the class that you have on that particular element. But not just based on class alone. As you can see down here, we can style too based on the ID that you have on the element. So just like the way you can style based on class, you can style based on ID. So selection based on ID like this. So you can style your element based on ID. How do you style based on ID? This one too, it have its own pattern in order for you to target based on ID. To select element based on ID, you start with this hash symbol, then followed by the ID name like this. So anytime you want to select element based on the ID name, you start with the hash. When you are dealing with class, it starts with dots. But when you want to select based on ID, as you can see, we are looking for any element with ID and the value have to be this ID name. Whatever that follows the hash, that is the name of the ID you are looking for. For example here, this heading. So what this one is saying is that we are looking for any element that have this particular ID. And it's going to change the color to red. The background here is going to be orange like that and so forth, depending on what you want to apply. So going back to the page, as you can see, nothing is happening. Why? Because I don't have any element with this particular ID. But now if I remove the hash and I change it to dots, you see that this thing is going to work. Why is it working? Because this one is not talking about ID again. It's not talking about class. Dots is what you use for class, while hash is what you use for ID. So nothing is working. In order for it to work, we need to find one element on our page and we give that ID. So ID, then heading. And once it's saved and go to the rule set, as you can see, it's applying the style because it can find the element with this particular ID. And please, these two are not the same, or these three are not the same at all. These three are not the same at all. So when you do H1 like this, you are selecting based on elements. So when you do it like this, you are selecting based on H1 tag. But when you do it .h1 like this one is not element again. This is not class. So when you start with dot, this is class. As you can see, any element with class H1. But if you look at the first one, it's only looking for H1 element. So the first one, when you don't have dots there and you use the element name, that is your element selector. When the thing starts with dots, it's not element again. Whatever that follows that dot, they are referred to as class. The same thing here too is not the same here. The three of them are doing different stuff, or they are targeting different element, or it can be same element too if that element have all the same. If you have one H1, they have class H1 and ID H1, then it will, that single element now, it will target all, like this selector will target that same element. But that doesn't mean this thing here are the same. So interpretation is different. This one is H1 element. This one is class H1 and this one is ID H1. Once you see the name without any dots or symbols here, it's element selector. But once you start with dots, that is class selector. Once you start with the hash symbol, that is ID selector. And as you can see from here, from VS Code. So that's the rule set you are applying. So you are applying a rule that look for any element that have particular ID H1. And if you can find it on the page, we want the color to be something, or you want to apply a particular CSS on your element. So that's how this thing works. It is very, 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 very important. It is very, very, very important that you know the difference between the element selector, the class selector, the ID selector. And there is one here that I skip that's supposed to add, because we're going to be needing it later on too, but it's not something that we'll be using every time. We're going to use it, but it's not something you'll be using frequently like that. And we revert it to as a universal selector. So we have something revert to as universal selector. Just like the name, it said you are selecting everything on the page at once. Universal selector allows you to target everything that we have on the page at once. It might look sweet to you, but it's not every time you want everything to look the same or to have the same styling. But we have the area where we normally use it, and when we get to that time, I will show you what you are going to be doing there. But for now, to apply universal selector, we have this asterisk. So anytime you use asterisk in place of any of the other selector that I've talked about, or the one I will be talking about later on, this one is known as universal. As you can see, it will select any element. There is no condition attached to it. For this one, the condition is that the element must have this class H1. For this one, the condition is that it must have the ID H1. For this one, the element must be H1. But once you use asterisk, it's just any element. It doesn't care whether it is H1 or it is P, it is HTML, it is body, and so forth like that. It will select all of them. For example, here, let me apply this property so that you can see it like that. What is this property? Once we get there, you are going to know about it. I think I've put it down here somewhere. Where is it? Pardon, yeah. So this is it here. So once we get to this box property, I will explain it, but for now I will just use it. So save it, and as you can see here, it's applying the same thing to all the elements on the page. It doesn't care whether it is the body, it is the H1, it is the paragraph, and so forth like that. Every element you have on the page is going to apply the style to all of them. But you might be thinking that this thing is sweet, I can quickly use it to apply something to all the elements as well. No, we don't use it like that, because you don't want this thing to just be the same thing across. But you can use it later on to do some resets on the page. But universal selector is asterisk. Anyway, you see the asterisk, they are referred to as universal selector. So we call it, let me put the text here for reference sake. So we have the universal selector like this. So this one allows us to select everything. That's why it's universal. Like the sets of everything are there like that. So asterisk is used to select everything on the page, but we don't use it like that. It have small place. We normally use it there, but it's something that you need to know about. So we've talked about the element selector. We've talked about the class selector, which allows you to select element based on class. We talked about the ID selector. We talked about the child selector. Now we want to, universal selector rather. Now we want to talk about the child. And this child selector is part of what we call the compound selector. So just like the way we have the basic one, but we can have something known as compound selector. So when you're talking about compound selectors, these are selectors, or these are group of selectors that you put together to select a particular element. When you're talking about compound, you have multiple selectors coming together to select a particular element, or to select element, or to target element on the screen. Every one of them that I've talked about here, as you can see, is just one selector. It's one stuff that you are typing. This heading, ID name, .h1, h1, and so forth like that. They are just single selector. But when you want to do some serious work, it's not every time that all those kind of a selector will work all the time. They will work, but they might take you a lot of time to just do some stuff. So that's where this other compound selector comes in, which is what you can use to combine multiple selectors together to have another selector. So you are combining multiple selectors to form another selector. And that's where this child selector comes in there, or what I call the child selector. So it's part of the compound because here you are going to be combining multiple selectors together to form another selector. That's just it. That's why it is compound. You have multiple stuff coming together to form another thing, like a family. You have a husband and wife coming together and give birth to a child, and then you have a family, or you have, which is now coming as a single entity. Here too, we can have multiple selectors coming together to form another selector there. And under it, we have this child selector. And what is child selector? This one allows you to select one element that is inside another element. Child selector allows you to select one element that is inside another element. For example, here now on this page, as you can see, we have H1 in different places. We have H1 in different places. And as you can see, I have that same H1 inside this group of this div, and at the same time inside this one down here. What if I want to select only the H1 that is inside div? I don't just want to select any H1. I only want to select all those one that is inside div. So how do you do something like that? You can't just come here and say you want to do H1 and you want to give it the color here, which is going to be green, or is going to be red for more clarity. So as you can see, all the H1 on the page, they are going to have red. But this is not what I want. I don't want to just select all the H1. I only want the one that is inside the div. But let me give the div some styling so that you can see what is going on. So the background is going to be yellow like this. So I'm selecting all the div on the page, and as you can see, the div, this is where we have the div, and it's giving them this background. So this div now, the H1 that is inside them, those are the H1 that I want to have this color red, not all the H1 that I have on the page. So how do you do something like that? That's where child selector comes in. Because what we want to do here is that we want to select only H1 that we can find inside div. You are selecting one stuff, or we are selecting one element that is inside another element, and that's what we call child selector. So you have a parent element, which is going to be something like this div, but you only want to select the H1 that is there. So this is now the child. So this H1 is child to this div. This P is child to this div here, because they are inside the div. Any element that is inside another element, those ones that are inside, they are referred to as child. The same thing here too for all this li that we have here. So all these li, they are child. All of them are just children of this ol here. And now imagine somewhere here I have ul, and I have the list of students like this, where I have student 1, again I have student 2, and I have student 3. What if I want to select only the li that is inside ul, not the one that is inside ol? That's where the child selector comes in. And just like what I mentioned here, I don't want to select all the H1. I just want to select the one that is inside the div down here. So how do you do that one? Is by using the child selector. And in order for you to do child selector, this is the pattern that it follows. So you are going to have the parent selector. Then after the parent selector, you are going to have the child selector. And this is what we call this stuff here. So what this thing is saying here is that we want to select this child that is inside parent. So this is what we call child selector. You are going to have the parent selector here, what you are using to select the parent, followed by space, then followed by what you are using to select the child. So this is what we call child selector. We want to select what is on this right if and only if it's inside what you have on the left. So here now, we can do something like that by doing div and H1 here. So this one at the top is selecting all the H1. But this one down here is only selecting the H1 that is inside div. And everything together here is what we call child selector. Child selector allows you to select one item or one element that is inside another element. And here, what are we trying to do? We want to select only the H1 that is inside div. So if you want to do something like that, then you are going to have the parent. because the div is the parent. Then after that, you are going to have what you are using to select the child. And as you can see, we are combining everything that we talked about here to form another selector here. And that's why it is compound, because you bring in multiple selectors together to form your own selectors here. So here we are selecting H1 that is inside the div. So, and here I can just say the color is going to be green. And as you can see, it's only the H1 that is inside the div that the color will be green. Any other H1 on the screen, as you can see here, none of them will have that style because they are not inside that parent. It's only the H1 that is inside the div that we want to style, not just any H1. When you do it like this, you are talking to all the H1. But when you do it like this, you are only talking to all the H1 that is inside div. All the H1 that is inside div only. The same thing here too. If I have this Li and I'm giving it the color of red like this, so save, you see that it will select the one that is inside OL, and at the same time it will select the one that is inside UL, because all of them are Li. But that's not what I want. I only want to select the one that is inside UL. So here too, we can just apply that our child selector. So here now, we just add the UL to it. Please, there is a space here. So what this thing is saying is that we only want to select the Li that is inside the UL. We don't care about the one that is inside OL. And now if I save it, as you can see, it's not selecting the one that is inside OL again. It's now focusing on the one that is inside UL. And if it's not the one that is inside UL too, I can just update it to OL. And here now, it will only focus on the one inside OL, not the one that is inside the UL. So the child selector allows us to select one element that is inside another element. But it doesn't need to be just a simple element like this. It can be multiple elements that are inside each other. For example, here, you can have S1, I can have S2, I can have S3, which is for selector 1, selector 2, and selector 3. So S1 for selector 1, S2 for selector 2, and S3 for selector 3. And what does this mean? What this one is saying is that we want to select this S3 that is inside S2, and S2 is inside S1. For example, I have div, I have form, and I have H1. So what this one is going to select is the H1 that is inside form, but that form too is inside div. As you can see here, we are only looking for H1. The only thing you want to start here is the last one beside the curly brace. The only thing you want to select is the last one beside the curly brace, but it must be inside everything you have on the left side of it. So here we want to select H1, but this H1 must be somewhere inside form, and this form too must be somewhere inside the div. So in order for it to select this H1, that means in order for us to have H1 that has this color, what did I want to use? Blue here. In order for us to see any H1 that have this color blue, that H1 must be inside form, and that form must be inside div element. So if I go back to the page, as you can see, it will not work. It will not select any of this H1 because it's not matching it. So in order for it to work, somewhere on the page, we have div element. And inside that div element, somewhere, we have the form. Then inside the form too, somewhere, we now have H1. This is what you are selecting. Here like that. So you are looking for this, and inside it, you have this one. So now save the code and go back to the screen. As you can see now, it will target it with that color blue. Now it's having color blue. Why is it working? Because we're able to find the H1 that is inside form, and that form too is not inside div. If this form is not inside div, it will not work. All of them must be there. Can you see that it's not working? Why is it not working? Even though we have the H1 inside form, the reason why it's not working is because the form is not inside div. So if you want to target this one, it means you are not going to add the div here if you want it to work, because you are only focusing on the H1 that is inside form. And once it's saved here, as you can see, it will work. But if that one is here, then the form too must be somewhere inside div. If it's not there, it will not work. and if it is there, then it's going to work. But where is it getting this yellow background from? Don't forget, we're applying this background here on the div. So CSS, you can target them based on different elements. So we are focusing on div here. That's why it's having this background yellow. And here, we are only focusing on H1. That's why it's having this color here. So any other text inside that form will not have anything apart from the H1 that we are focusing on there like that. So save this. You see that the background will cover the P, but it will never have that color, because the only thing we said we want to style here is the H1 that is inside form, and that form too is inside div. So you can use this thing now to target a particular element that is inside another element and so forth like that. So this is where I'll be stopping for today, because I have another class right now. So any question on these selectors? So in the next class, I'm going to be giving you a live class work that I'll be writing some English stuff, then you now convert them to selector. So that's what we are going to start with first in the next class, so that you get the stuff very well.
Okay, sir.
All right, so that will be all for today. Let me stop recording. I will upload the video.